So did Jesus claim to be God? Earlier video I referred to C.S. Lewis's argument of Jesus couldn't just be accepted as a good man if he claimed to be God. He would either be who he claimed to be, or if he was not who he claimed to be, he was either crazy or he was a liar. All of that depends on whether or not Jesus actually claimed to be God. I'm going to go over a few ways we see in Scripture that Jesus in fact did claim to be that. I'm going to show you one other thing that shows that's not just later interpretation. That's actually what happened. First, if you find these videos helpful, would encourage you to subscribe. If you know somebody else who's kind of struggling with this issue and you think it might be helpful for them, share it with them. So obviously, Jesus didn't get up in front of everybody and have some sort of press conference and say, I just want to let everybody know I'm coming out, I am God, and go from there. Jesus did claim to be God, and it was done in a way that made sense within that context, within that culture, and within the whole background of Scripture. So the first thing that he did that I want to look at is that he claimed to do things that only God could do. This is the whole point of Mark chapter 2. There's a story where they bring someone to Jesus who's confined to a bed. He's paralyzed, and Jesus looks at him and said, "You're forgiven." Now, they haven't said anything about sins or forgiveness, but that's just Jesus's response. And so all the teachers around him are saying, "This is blasphemy. Only God can forgive." Now, Jesus doesn't turn to them and say, no, of course, anyone can forgive, or I am, greater than people, or a great prophet can forgive. What does he do? He turns to the man and says, or he tells everybody, I'm going to heal him in order to show that my other claim that you can't see is true. And so his healing is to be evidence that he does indeed forgive. And in his forgiving, he's claiming the authority of God to forgive sins. He also showed an incredible authority over Scripture. Many times Jesus would teach and say, you've heard it said, but I say to you, as he's explaining and interpreting Scripture as the one who wrote it. That's why all the people around him said he's teaching as one with authority, because he's not showing the tradition and the argument of the teachers of that age. He's showing that he has authority to explain what the Scriptures were, which is kind of saying that he is the one who spoke these words. He's the one that gave these words. He has the authority to tell you what they really mean. So the other thing is Jesus claimed divine names, divine positions when referring to himself. Very often he was called the Son of God. This wasn't some kind of generic way we might talk about all people being children of God, but the way he spoke about it meant he obviously had an authority and a different relationship with God than anyone else does. And a son has kind of the characteristics and the qualities of their father. That's what Jesus was saying in using that term. Jesus also referred to several of the prophets and kings of the Old Testament as and said that he was greater than them. So he talked about the sign of Jonah, and that one greater than Jonah is there. The wisdom of Solomon, and one greater than Solomon was in their midst. And I find that interesting that you don't see places where people are really ranking the prophets. This prophet's greater than that one. So it's not like he's saying, well, he's greater in that sense. It's more of greater than that he's just something completely different. He's beyond them. And he refers to himself in an authority greater than all the other respected prophets and patriarchs of the Old Testament. For example, in Matthew 22, he brings up how the understanding was that the Messiah would be the son of David. And he refers to Psalm 110, and he asks the Pharisees that he's arguing with, how is it that the Messiah is going to be the son if David calls him Lord? Because you don't say sir to your child, you say sir to one who is greater. And that psalm there is using two different words for God. The Lord said to my Lord. You know, that reference of Lord possibly could refer to human lords, but in the context it seems to be another part of evidence that's pointing to Jesus being much more than a human Lord. Another place is Matthew 11. Jesus is talking about John the Baptist. And this is a great passage because he's talking about John the Baptist. He said, "Who did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is of he whom is written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has risen no one greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." It's a remarkable passage because he's saying, hey, look, John the Baptist is greater than Moses, greater than Abraham, greater than David. John the Baptist is greater than Elijah and any other prophet. The reason he is because he came to prepare the way for me. That is a bold claim. And it's even bolder if you look at the passage that he's quoting that's talking about the forerunner, because the forerunner comes to make room, to make preparation for God himself to come to the temple. That whole passage is talking about the forerunner for the Lord himself to enter into his temple. So there's another claim where Jesus is pointing to who he is as God himself. The final one in this category is Jesus is arguing again with some of the leaders, and he talks about how Abraham saw his day and rejoiced. And they ask him, well, how could Abraham have possibly seen your day? You're only 50 years old, and that was, hundreds of years ago. And Jesus says that before Abraham was, I am. Now, there's two amazing things about this. One is that he's saying that he is before Abraham. He is, prior to him, but he's also not just saying that he's prior, that he was, but he's referring to Abraham in the past tense and himself in the present tense. This seems to be a reference to his eternality, that he even now is outside of time. He even now is before Abraham. Abraham was, I am. The other amazing thing, obviously, is that is the name God revealed himself to in the burning bush to Moses, that his name was, tell them I am sent you. There's several places that scholars see where Jesus is using that I am, and it refers to I am, the good shepherd, or I am the bread of life. And all of those, we hear echoes of that divine I am. But here, pretty explicitly, Jesus is not saying I am something else. He is just saying I am. He's taken the divine name upon himself. All right, so the third way that Jesus showed to us that he is God makes sense only within the context of the faith in which he was part of. Jews understood there is only one God, and there is to be no worship of anyone but this God. And the amazing thing is, Jesus received worship. People worshiped him, and he didn't stop it. That is a claim to be one worthy of worship. That's a claim to be God. There are several places where we see people bowing down to worship an angel, or bowing down to worship people, and they say, stop it, don't worship me. This is one of the things in Revelation, is John sees the angel that's coming to him, and he bows down and worships the angel, and the angel says, don't worship me, I'm only a creation like you. And even if he's great, and if he's super, and he's above, he's still not God. But in John chapter 9, Jesus has healed a blind man, and slowly this man is coming to understand who Jesus is. And towards the end of that chapter, Jesus says, do you trust in the Son of Man? And when he explains that he is the Son of Man, the man who was blind says, I believe, Lord, and he worshiped him. And there's no reference to Jesus saying, don't worship me, I'm not God. He took the worship, he received it, and we see that worship being given to him in other parts of the New Testament after his resurrection. Jesus was claiming to be divine. He is God, and that is what the scriptures claim about him. So how do you know that's not just our interpretation? How do you know that's not just kind of putting a spin on things we could make into another way to understand? Or why wasn't this clearer? Well, it was pretty clear. It's the reason they crucified him. They didn't kill Jesus because he was teaching just a slight tweak on what was being taught. There were lots of different groups within Judaism at the time. They didn't go kill the Essenes. They didn't go kill other groups that were teaching. It wasn't that he was just teaching a slightly different thing. The scriptures say that, well, in John chapter 5, that they were enraged because he said he was the Son of God, and they understood that was making himself equal with God. That's what the scriptures say, and therefore they were seeking to kill him. And so when we read about Jesus' trial in Matthew chapter 26, the reason they take him and hand him over to be killed is for the charge of blasphemy, of claiming to be God. Jesus claimed to be God. It's throughout the New Testament.